The fluorescent lights in the drafting room at the German Naval Construction Office in Berlin flickered as Professor Helmuth Walter leaned over the technical drawings spread across the table. It was January 1943, and at 53 years old, Walter had spent his entire career designing submarines. But the drawings before him represented something revolutionary, a submarine that could dive to 850 feet, nearly twice as deep as any existing U-boat, and remain submerged almost indefinitely. "You're telling me this is actually possible?" asked Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, studying the specifications with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. Dönitz was 51, a veteran submarine commander from World War I, who understood better than anyone that Germany was losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied aircraft and destroyers were hunting his U-boats with devastating effectiveness, sinking submarines faster than they could be built. "Not only possible, Herr Admiral, but necessary," Walter replied, his finger tracing the submarine's revolutionary hull design on the blueprint. "Our Type 7 boats can dive to 230 meters maximum. The British and Americans know this. Their depth charges are set to detonate at depths we cannot escape, but this boat, the Type XXI, can go to 280 meters, perhaps deeper in emergency situations. At that depth, we're below the reach of conventional depth charges." The Type XXI Electra boot, as it would come to be known, represented the most ambitious submarine project Germany had ever attempted. It wasn't just about diving deep, though that capability alone would be revolutionary. The entire design philosophy broke from traditional submarine thinking. Conventional submarines were surface ships that could submerge temporarily. They ran on diesel engines while surfaced, switching to battery-powered electric motors when submerged. But batteries depleted quickly, forcing submarines to surface frequently to run diesels and recharge, making them vulnerable to air attack. The Type XXI inverted this paradigm. It was designed as a true submarine, a vessel optimized for underwater operation. Massive battery banks provided enough power for extended submerged operations. A revolutionary schnorkel system allowed diesel engines to run while the boat remained at periscope depth, drawing air through a tube. Streamlined hull design reduced drag, increasing submerged speed to an unprecedented 17 knots, faster than most surface vessels and far faster than any previous submarine underwater. And the pressure hull, constructed from special high-tensile steel in a figure-8 cross-section design, could withstand depths that would crush any other submarine of the era. Kapitänleutnant Adalbert Schnee stood in the cavernous construction hall at the Blohmen-Voss shipyard in Hamburg in September 1944, watching workers assemble sections of U-2511, one of the first Type XXI submarines. At 31, Schnee was already an ace with 22 Allied ships sunk to his credit. He had commanded Type 7 U-boats for 3 years and had survived more close calls with depth charges than he cared to remember. Now he was being given command of this new submarine, this revolutionary boat that promised to change everything about underwater warfare. But watching the construction process, Schnee felt both excitement and concern. "It's being built differently than anything I've seen," Schnee told his designated first officer, Oberleutnant zur See Fritz Weber. Weber was 26, an engineering graduate who had been selected specifically because the Type XXI required officers who understood its complex electrical and hydraulic systems. "Modular construction, Herr Callot," Weber explained, using the traditional German abbreviation for Kapitänleutnant. "They're building the boat in 8 separate sections at different factories, then assembling them here. It's supposed to speed production. They can build a Type XXI in 6 months instead of 18. "And does it work?" Weber hesitated. "In theory, yes. In practice, there have been problems. The sections don't always fit together perfectly. welding quality has been inconsistent, and we're using untrained workers, slave labourers, teenagers, old men, because all the skilled shipwrights have been conscripted for the army. This was the paradox of the Type XXI program. Germany had designed the most advanced submarine in the world, incorporating technology that wouldn't be matched until the nuclear submarines of the 1950s. But they were building it in 1944, when Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under Allied bombing, when skilled workers were scarce, when quality control was nearly impossible. The first Type XXI, U-2501, was commissioned in June 1944. The second, U-2502, followed in July. By war's end, 118 Type XXI submarines would be commissioned, with hundreds more in various stages of construction. It was an extraordinary production achievement accomplished under desperate circumstances. But commissioning a submarine and making it combat-ready were very different things. The Type XXI was so radically different from previous U-boats that crews had to be completely retrained. The diving procedures, the electrical systems, the weapons handling, the emergency protocols, everything was new. Schnee took U-2511 to sea for the first time in January 1945, conducting trials in the Baltic Sea, where German forces still maintained control. From the moment the submarine submerged, Schnee recognized he was commanding something extraordinary. "Take her down to 150 meters, Schnee ordered his diving officer. The depth gauge descended smoothly. 50 meters, 75, 100, 125, 150. At depths where a Type 7 would be straining against pressure, groaning and creaking ominously, U-2511 felt solid, quiet, stable. 150 meters, Herr Callot. Holding steady. Take her deeper, 200 meters. This was already beyond the safe operating depth of conventional U-boats. The crew tensed, listening for the sounds they'd been trained to fear. The popping of rivets, the shriek of hull plates flexing beyond their limits, the rush of water through a catastrophic breach. But U-2511 descended silently. 175 meters, 190, 200. The hull barely made a sound. The pressure gauges showed the hull under stress, but well within design parameters. 200 meters, Herr Callot. All systems normal. Take her to 250. Herr Callot? The diving officer's voice carried a note of alarm. That's beyond test depth. The specifications say. I know what the specifications say. I want to know what this boat can actually do. 250 meters. They descended into darkness that no German submarine had ever survived. 220 meters, 230, 240. Now the hull did creak, subtle sounds of steel under immense pressure. The crew was silent, every man listening, waiting for disaster. 250 meters, over 800 feet down. The pressure at this depth was approximately 365 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a conventional submarine like an aluminum can. All systems still functioning normally, Herr Callot, Weber reported after checking every gauge and indicator. Some minor leaking around the stern torpedo tube seals, but within acceptable limits. The boat is holding. Schnee allowed himself to smile. At this depth, U-2511 was invulnerable to conventional anti-submarine weapons. Allied depth charges were typically set to detonate at 150 or 200 meters. At 250 meters, the boat was below the reach of most enemies. But depth capability was only part of the Type XXI's revolutionary design. The real advantage was submerged performance. Schnee ordered flank speed while still submerged at 200 meters. The massive battery banks fed power to the electric motors, and U-2511 surged forward. The speed indicator climbed, 10 knots, 12, 14, 16. At 17 knots submerged, the Type XXI was faster underwater than most Allied destroyers and corvettes were on the surface. A submarine that could outrun its pursuers while remaining deep enough to avoid depth charges had the potential to revolutionize submarine warfare. "This is incredible," Weber said, watching the speed indicator. "We're doing 17 knots at 200 meters depth. No destroyer in the world can catch us down here." But there was a catch. The massive battery banks that enabled such performance depleted quickly at high speed. At 17 knots, U-2511 could maintain that pace for about 90 minutes before batteries were exhausted. At more economical speeds, 5 or 6 knots, the boat could remain submerged for several days, using the schnorkel to run diesels and recharge without fully surfacing. Through February and March 1945, Schnee put U-2511 through exhaustive trials, pushing the boat to its limits, training his crew on the revolutionary systems. They practiced crash dives. U-2511 could go from surfaced to periscope depth in 18 seconds, far faster than conventional boats. They practiced silent running at extreme depths, testing how quiet the boat could be to evade sonar detection. They practiced torpedo attacks using the boat's advanced targeting computer, which could calculate firing solutions while the submarine maneuvered at high speed. The Type XXI was designed to be a hunter, not hunted. 6 bow torpedo tubes, all forward-facing, eliminating the stern tubes that conventional boats carried, loaded from an automated reload system that could have all 6 tubes reloaded in 12 minutes. Previous submarines required 30 minutes or more for manual torpedo reloading. This meant a Type XXI could fire 6 torpedoes, reload, and fire 6 more while still submerged and evading, potentially devastating an entire convoy. But by the time U-2511 completed training and was declared combat ready in April 1945, the strategic situation had become hopeless for Germany. The Red Army was fighting in Berlin. Allied forces had crossed the Rhine. The 1,000-year Reich was collapsing after 12 years. Dönitz, now Germany's head of state following Hitler's suicide, ordered the remaining U-boats to continue operations. On April 30, 1945, Schnee took U-2511 on its first and only combat patrol, heading into the North Atlantic to attack Allied shipping. The patrol would demonstrate everything the Type XXI could do and highlight the tragic timing of its introduction. U-2511 operated for 2 weeks in the North Atlantic without once being forced to fully surface. The schnorkel system worked perfectly, allowing the boat to run diesels at periscope depth, recharging batteries while remaining hidden. Allied aircraft passed overhead repeatedly, but their radar couldn't detect a submarine with only a small schnorkel tube exposed. On May 4, 1945, Schnee detected a formation of British warships, a cruiser and several destroyers. Using the Type XXI's advanced sonar and targeting systems, he maneuvered into attack position while remaining at 200 meters depth. The British ships had no idea a submarine was stalking them. Schnee brought U-2511 to periscope depth and lined up a perfect shot on the cruiser. His finger was on the firing button when a radio message arrived. Germany had agreed to surrender. All U-boats were ordered to surface, cease hostilities, and report to Allied ports. For several hours, Schnee ignored the order. He had a perfect firing solution. He could sink that cruiser, prove what the Type XXI could do in combat. But to what purpose? The war was over. Sinking a British cruiser after the surrender wouldn't change the outcome. It would just kill hundreds of British sailors and turn Schnee into a war criminal. He ordered U-2511 to surface and radioed his position to British forces. When Royal Navy officers boarded the submarine to take possession, they were astonished by what they found. "This isn't like any U-boat we've captured before," Lieutenant Commander James Harrison told his boarding team. Harrison was a submarine officer himself, familiar with captured German submarines. But U-2511 was something entirely different. "The diving depth gauge goes to 280 meters, Harrison said, examining the control room. "Our boats can't go half that deep, And look at these battery banks. They're enormous, and this schnorkel system is far more sophisticated than we expected. Over the following weeks, Allied technical teams thoroughly examined U-2511 and other captured Type XXI submarines. What they discovered simultaneously impressed and terrified them. If this submarine had entered service 2 years earlier, we would have lost the Battle of the Atlantic, Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of British Western Approaches, wrote in his assessment. It's faster submerged than our destroyers are on the surface. It can dive deeper than our depth charges can reach. It can remain submerged for weeks, and it carries enough torpedoes to devastate multiple convoys. Thank God it came too late to matter. But the Type XXI's impact didn't end with Germany's surrender. Both the United States and Soviet Union seized Type XXI submarines as war prizes, studied them exhaustively, and incorporated their design principles into post-war submarine development. The US Navy's Guppy program, Greater Underwater Propulsion Power, upgraded World War II fleet submarines with streamlined hulls, increased battery capacity, and schnorkel systems based directly on Type XXI design. These upgraded submarines served throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s. The Soviet Union went further, building the Whiskey class and later submarine classes that were essentially copies of the Type XXI with Soviet equipment. The influence of the Electroboot can be traced through every submarine designed until nuclear propulsion made the diesel-electric paradigm obsolete in the 1960s. Schnee survived the war and eventually commanded submarines in the post-war West German Navy, which was established in 1956. He died in 1982, aged 68, having lived to see submarines that could dive to depths that would have seemed impossible in 1945, powered by nuclear reactors that allowed unlimited submerged endurance. But he always maintained that the Type XXI, despite its brief service, had been the most revolutionary submarine of its era. If we had 300 Type XXI boats operational in 1943 instead of 1945, we could have won the Battle of the Atlantic, Schnee said in a 1979 interview. At the very least, we could have delayed the Allied victory by years. The Allies couldn't have invaded France if we'd been able to cut their supply lines from America. But by the time the Type XXI was ready, it was too late. Germany had already lost the war. This is why the Type XXI remains relatively forgotten despite its revolutionary nature. It arrived too late to affect the war's outcome. Of the 118 boats commissioned, only 2, U-2511 and U-3008, actually conducted combat patrols, and neither fired a shot in anger. The rest were either still in training, trapped in Baltic ports by Allied naval forces, or scuttled by their crews when Germany surrendered. Professor Walter, the submarine's designer, was captured by the British after the war and spent 5 years working for the Royal Navy on submarine development before being released. He died in 1980, age 87, having seen his designs influence submarine construction worldwide. The modular construction techniques developed for the Type XXI program, building submarines in sections at different factories, would become standard practice in the post-war era. The figure-8 pressure hull design, which provided both depth capability and internal space efficiency, influenced submarine construction for decades. But perhaps the Type XXI's most important legacy was demonstrating that submarines could be true underwater vessels rather than surface ships that occasionally submerged. This conceptual shift drove all subsequent submarine development, culminating in nuclear submarines like USS Nautilus that could remain submerged indefinitely and circumnavigate the globe without surfacing. Today, several Type XXI submarines survive as museum ships. U-2540, later renamed Wilhelm Bauer, is preserved in Bremerhaven, Germany. U-3008, which was commissioned into the US Navy after capture and used for testing, was eventually scrapped, but her conning tower is preserved at the Naval Submarine Base, New London in Connecticut. Visitors to these museums can see the revolutionary design features that made the Type XXI capable of diving deeper than any other World War II submarine. The reinforced pressure hull, the massive battery banks, the streamlined exterior, the advanced hydraulic systems. They can appreciate the engineering achievement while understanding the historical irony, a submarine capable of changing naval warfare that arrived too late to matter. The story of the Type XXI is ultimately a tale of brilliant engineering undermined by strategic failure and bad timing. Germany's submarine designers created a revolutionary vessel that incorporated technology years ahead of its time. But they created it for a nation that had already lost the war, building it with an industrial base collapsing under Allied bombing, crewing it with hastily trained personnel, and deploying it at a moment when surrender was weeks away. If the Type XXI had entered service in 1943, when Allied convoys were still vulnerable and U-boats were winning the Battle of the Atlantic, history might have been very different. A fleet of submarines that could dive to 850 feet, outrun surface vessels while submerged, remain underwater for weeks, and devastate convoys with rapid-fire torpedo attacks might have prolonged the war by years, costing countless additional lives. Instead, the Type XXIs arrived in April 1945, conducted 2 combat patrols without firing a shot, and surrendered along with the rest of Germany's military. It was the most advanced submarine of World War II, capable of diving deeper than anything else afloat, and it's largely forgotten because it was also the most irrelevant, a revolutionary weapon that arrived too late to revolutionize anything except post-war submarine design. That paradox defines the Type XXI's legacy, simultaneously the most advanced and least consequential submarine of its era, a technological triumph and strategic failure, a glimpse of the future built by a nation with no future left. The submarine that could dive deeper than anything else disappeared into the obscurity of historical footnotes, remembered primarily by submarine enthusiasts and historians who appreciate what it represented rather than what it accomplished. Adalbert Schnee's U-2511, the only Type XXI to conduct an actual war patrol and live to tell the tale, surrendered with a spotless record. No ships sunk, no shots fired, no battles fought. But in those 2 weeks of operations, Schnee proved what the boat could do, diving deep, running fast, evading detection, stalking prey with impunity. He proved the Type XXI worked exactly as designed. He just proved it too late for it to matter.